So, good morning. I'm Richard Hainsworth, and today I wanted to talk about the next version of RakuDoc. And if I miss anything out, you'll have to ask me questions later. There is far more to be talked about than there is time in this 20 minutes. And since I was involved in the change of the specifications, then I've just written the renderer that now renders it into text and HTML and Markdown. I actually know I've got more things to talk about than I've included, so it's been a big problem of mine to just contract everything. I wanted to talk about what documentation is. I wanted to talk about why we're changing from RakuDoc 1, which used to be called Pod 6. I want to show how that can be extended and how a well-designed language actually has further implications, further extensions than were originally intended. And I want also to talk about a bit of my motivation. The first thing is, what is documentation? Now, when people started writing software, obviously, you know, I don't know if everybody's heard the apocryphal comment that somebody had written this fabulous piece of software right at the very beginning. It worked, and then he went on a trip around the underground to see if he could get to every station on the underground. It didn't work. Someone went in to look at the software, and they found one comment that said 1812, and eventually they couldn't work out what that was. It turned out it was rest in peace, so nothing to do with the programming. So it was then recognized that you have to put comments into programs to tell people about the programming. And so we had then documenting the software in order for it to become understandable to a maintainer or somebody who has to refactor it or extend it. So you've got a black box, which is your software, and then you're talking about how it works on the inside. As the software industry moved from writing simple one-off pieces of software to incorporating modules and libraries and other things, you needed to know not how the software worked inside, you wanted to know the functionality, how to use the software. So actually you're documenting not the internals, you're documenting outside of the box. This distinction between the two does obviously have some interaction. I mean, if you're documenting the externals, you're also documenting the API, you're documenting how the functions and what parameters it's taking and what the outputs are. But they are two fundamentally different things. Now, as I said, I'll repeat it again. Somebody sent me an email as soon as I had put my talk up and said, oh, I'm hoping to talk to you. I'm coming to your talk, and I hope to talk about literate programming. So is that person here? That person isn't here. Okay, or if they are, they're being silent. So I included a slide about literate programming. And the reason I did is because whenever there have been conversations about literate programming and RakuDoc, I've always said, well, RakuDoc is all about literate programming. And then I looked on the site about literate programming, and apart from the first quotation, which I've always taken to be my definition of what literate programming is, and I've just included a few of the few sentences, which is Donald Knuth's idea about writing software as being an essayist, and it should be intelligible, and therefore, you know, you shouldn't regard it as talking to computers. You need to talk to human beings. I thought, okay, I like that idea. I'm wholly in favor of literate programming. RakuDoc is being designed for literate programming, except it's not quite, because many of the implementations that try and address this goal are looking at it from the inside of, to my way of thinking, of the inside of the box, rather than the outside of the box, because you have to adopt a fundamentally different mindset when you're documenting something for functionality. So why change? Well, we had RakuDoc 1, which was called, which we used to be called Pod 6, plain old documentation 6, which obviously is an extension from Perl's pod. And it was designed by Damian Conway right at the very beginning. And the design is in one of the S papers. If anybody knows about Raku, there was the and apocryphas and all sorts of things. That's right, yes. Well, S is actually the summaries, synopsis, yes. Some of the elements for version 1 of Pod 6 were never implemented. Some were implemented and never documented, and so didn't exist until I was trying to rewrite it, and then I discovered actually they were implemented. And then there were things that were absolutely no use, because in the meantime, in between the specification of RakuDoc 1 or Pod 6 and now, Unicode has been universally adopted. At that time, it was just a thought in somebody, people were just discussing it. So all of the things related to encoding had just gone, you don't need to worry about it all. Like I said here. So we needed to change it, we needed to update it, and I thought the updating was going to be just one or two things that we'll get rid of and implement, and everybody was saying, no, you've got to keep that, you've got to keep this. So we've actually added far more things in than we've got rid of. And then there was a clarification. It was quite clear to me from reading the specification that there were actually two parts of RakuDoc. One is related to IDEs. So if you go into Comma, which is the sort of typical IDE based on intelligence engine for Raku, if you hover over some container, so for example, a callable, which is a function or a sub, or you hover over a scalar, then you will get the information that is given by the scalar, sort of declarator blocks is what they're called. So inside the code, for the code documenter, there is information that used to be comments, but is actually attached to the variable after it has been compiled. And there are some other interesting things in there as well. You can attach data in the same way as you do in a Perl with the double dash data, double dash. There's a function for that. So there are also parts of the RakuDoc which is completely different, and it's actually for documenting outside the box, for when you're wanting to talk about things, how a user should use it, how it can configure the software, how it can install the software, how the user can install the software, and so forth. So what I wanted to do is to clarify these two cases and make sure that they were clear in the minds of the person who's beginning to use RakuDoc 2. Now, some of the extensions. We have new elements that were not in version 1. We have custom blocks. Now, custom blocks was mentioned for in RakuDoc 1, but were never used in the generic pod to HTML. But then I actually rewrote pod to HTML and included a way of doing custom blocks. So we wanted to make sure that custom blocks were there. We can now have custom markup. So any Unicode character with an upper property can be used as markup. So the difference between blocks and the markup is that markup tends to be inline changes, so bold, italic. But here you can also put inline formulas. You can, what I wanted to do is to have a button that you could press for paying for something. If you, for example, PayPal or whatever payment portal you wanted, that you could put that into a document as well. And then the other extension is that a good design, and Damian Conway has spent a huge amount of time working on the design of RakuDoc so that really extensible, it's orthogonal, and you can embed things into each other. So it lends itself to other possibilities. And I want to do this, just give you a couple of examples. One of the new elements is about tables. Tables are used everywhere in documentation, and there are two paradigms for tables. There's the HTML one, which has rows and cells, and then essentially the number of cells in a row gives you the columns, and HTML then works out where to put everything. And then GTK has got grids, where you've got this sort of semi-infinite grid, and you place blocks within the grid. Both of them are interesting. They appear to be sort of exclusive of each other. But Damian has come across, has invented a way that means that you can use both paradigms in any way you want. So for example, this is the RakuDoc for a table. This is the table as it comes out. And you can see that we've got a column which is shifted across the top. We've got rows that are shifted down too. We've got, you can put labels on anywhere that you want them to be, and then it's all nicely modified. And this is the way you do it. And in fact, what you can do is you can define things this way, which these are all defined this way, sort of row by row, and then this one is defined as a column which is down here. So we've got row headers and then we've got columns. I'm not going to spend too much time on all of that, but basically it's a way of defining either row by row, cell by cell, or column by column. Oh, hang on. There we go. There's a row and there's the final column. Gosh. Sorry? Indentation. Oh, yeah. You mean in terms of not indentation, but justification? You can justify. No, that's just for clarity. Sorry, this indentation. No, that's simply for clarity. And in fact, yeah. Oh, I know. Not. There's far too many things to talk about. So, custom blocks. I'm going to give you a lot of slides. You'll find at the bottom here there is a GitHub pages. If you were in the previous talk, you would have heard about those. And I've put all of this renderer onto GitHub pages. And these are plugins that create that access that generate blocks. So here's a block graph viz. So equals graph viz is the beginning of a block, and the data, there are two sorts of data. There's metadata, which can be fed to the template, and then there's the data that is fed to whatever is generating the rendered version. So here we have graph viz. So this is the RakuDoc. Now, I apologize about the rendering colors. It's this is an ongoing. It's still a bit of a work in progress. So the rendering colors I haven't optimized. Essentially, what you've got is here. You've got the beginning of a block, which is the custom block. You've got some metadata. Basically putting it as that goes into the table of contents for the whole page, and this then changes the caption, so it's not graph viz as the heading, but it's this a simple example. This then here between the beginning and the end is the data that is fed to graph viz to dot, which is then has to be installed and then it's generated. And dot then generates this graph. Dot is a very versatile graph diagram language. So this is generated by this. It's truncated. You'll find the whole code on the GitHub page, but it generates one sort of diagram, and then you can use again dot in GraphViz, which generates this rather neat graphic. Now, these three examples I've just taken from the GraphViz examples page, but GraphViz is then exposed in RakuDoc. So you can be writing a whole document in RakuDoc with headers and tables of contents and indices, and you can include a graph at any time you want it, and it can then be included in the table of contents. So this then here is another plugin that I wrote for Latex functions. So this is the final version that you see when it's rendered. Oh, I've got 5 minutes. Oh God, okay, never mind. This is one for, this is maps. Instead of Google Maps, it's leaflet maps. So new applications, okay. Markdown is used heavily in creating creating web pages for the content, but it's very minimal, and it's also completely. There's always a different syntax for each of the different things. So this is a header. This is for a graphic. This is some text. Then this is a code. I actually wrote the mapping plugin for leaflet maps for that. So okay, here we are. That's just giving you some ideas about why RakuDoc is better than Markdown. Markdown has been increased ad hoc, and so there are various flavors of Markdown. So there's GitHub Markdown and there's other Markdowns. And in order to extend Markdown, it's not a part of the original specification, but RakuDoc, all of the syntax is the same, and there are ways to extend it. So you can write a plugin that will give you a custom head. Right, and my motivation, I want to write a content management system for the web that is multilingual. I've written the drivers for the RakuDocs documentation suite. It was about 500, 700 different source files, and they're all then compiled into the website that you can see on RakuDoc, docs.raku.org. That's my work. This is an extension of that work because what I want to do is to enable that documentation to be multilingual. So it's not just English, but there'll also be Chinese, Spanish, Welsh. I live in Wales. So that anybody can then read it. But also, I want it to be so that when you're in the middle of a page down here in Chinese, and the Chinese doesn't make sense, you want to see the English, you switch to English, and it'll go to the canonical text in English from a place in the middle of a page to the same equivalent place in the English context, which means that every section that is in English has to be translated and has to be synchronized together so you can flop from one to the other. Now, it is possible to do that, but it's not possible to do it easily, and I want to make sure it's done easily. And then finally, the texts that are available on the internet in most web pages are simple texts. When you go to complex texts, you actually have to dumb them down to get them into HTML. So RakuDoc has got metadata that you can include in the document itself, and that metadata can then give you ways to synchronize between sections, and it can give you ways to extract more data out of it and create search functions and index functions and so on and so forth. So that's my motivation, and if you've got any questions, I'll take them. Yes. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. I'm coming to your talk later. You were supposed to be before me. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sorry? No, no. But I will. Yes. No, you can write in RakuDoc and then have it published in Markdown. Yes. Okay, I don't have a converter from Markdown to RakuDoc, but I do have a converter from RakuDoc to Markdown, because one is more complex than the other. Okay, so Markdown is essentially a subset, so it should be easier to go the other way around.